July 3rd, 1990. With the Gateway Arch as a majestic backdrop, St. Louis, Missouri celebrated America's independence. That same night, 18-year-old Stacy Lannert claimed her own independence in brutal fashion by killing her father in their home as he slept on the couch. Now, years later, Stacy Lannert is in the Women's Correctional Center in Vandalia, Missouri.
It's hard. It's hard to wake up in this place every day.
She's serving a sentence of life without parole. Her only hope, an act of clemency from the governor. But prosecutors say if anyone does not deserve mercy, it's Stacy Lannert. They say she murdered for money, $500,000 to be exact, and call her story a flat-out lie.
It makes it pretty clear to me that she's manufacturing, she's making up the whole allegation of sexual abuse.
I didn't want anybody to think that I had killed my dad just for money.
Lannert says her father's murder was an act of desperation, born out of years of abuse. But the story she tells now is different than the one she told then. It's more horrific, the details more sickening. Some memories, Lannert claims, have returned in the years since her conviction. It's only with the passage of time that she says she can bring herself to talk about them. And she does, in graphic detail.
He asked me to kiss his friend, like big girls do. I didn't like I called it the white stuff, and he told me that that was marshmallow cream. He had placed some marshmallow cream on him and asked me to lick it off, and I did.
Her attorney says it makes perfect sense that the shocking details are just now coming out.
She's so typical of abused children. It's taken years. It's taken years before she can say the words that she's needed to say to explain this horrible thing that happened to her.
1990, the 4th of July. At 4:20 p.m., police responded to a call at 3719 Eminence Street in the middle-class St. Louis suburb of St. John, the home of 18-year-old Stacy Lannert. When officers arrived at the house, they found Stacy and a friend, Jason Fortune. The teenagers said they had called police after looking into the home and seeing the bloodied body of Stacy's father on the couch.
They had not gone into the house. They saw the individual who was the victim lying on a couch from what we'd call a peephole in a front door.
The victim, 43-year-old Tom Lannert, a divorced father who worked as a financial advisor and lived with his 2 teenage daughters. He had been shot once in the shoulder and again, point blank, in the forehead. A short time later, Stacy's younger sister, Christy, arrived at the Lannert house. She ran up to her sister and the two became hysterical. As the girls cried, the police realized there was a problem with Stacy and her friend's story.
What they said that they saw could not be seen from that little peephole in a front door, with the distance between that and where Mr. Lannert was lying on a couch dead. They could not have seen what they said unless they were in the room with the victim.
The chief told officers he had his suspicions.
They said to take them down to the station and separate them because one of those 3 did it.
Police drove Stacy Lannert, her sister Christy, and their friend Jason Fortune back to the station, where the 3 gave written statements.
In evaluating the written statements, there was some major discrepancies in what each one of them said.
St. Louis County Detective Tom Schulte has worked extensively with juveniles during his career. He was brought in to question Stacy Lannert later that evening.
When I walked into the room, I just had that feeling that there wasn't something right. I thought that she was keeping something from me about the family life.
The detective, who specialized in child abuse cases, raised the subject of abuse with Stacy.
You go, was there any type of abuse, either physical or sexual, in the family? You know, was there anything going on at the house?
And Schulte said "Did your dad ever hit you?" And I looked at him and I said, "No." And I started crying. And I knew that he knew that my dad had abused me.
She told me that over the years, she had been abused and raped by her father.
Then Stacy dropped a bombshell.
And that's when she confessed to killing her father.
I told him that yes, it was me, and that I had done it.
The detective wanted to know more about the alleged abuse.
I had her tell me some specific things, like about when it started, how she felt when it first started. The things that I had known from experience is usually true, you know, the feelings, how you feel trapped. And she came across with what I was looking for. So as she told me her story from the beginning, you know, there was no reason for me to not to believe her.
The detective then asked Lannert to describe the murder.
She told me that's when she shot him once. The first shot, I believe, hit him in the collarbone, in the back. He sat up, mumbled a few words about, you know, "Get me some help, call 911," and then laid his head back down, and that's when she shot him again.
Following her confession, the police took Stacy back to the house to do a video walkthrough of the crime scene. Stacy says she felt like she was in shock.
I didn't even remember half of what had already happened, and I was so just emotionless by this time. I just couldn't, oh God, I couldn't believe that all this had happened and that in my life, whew, it was just too overwhelming.
You understand your rights and you're willing to do this of your own free will and accord. Okay, now, would you first take me back to the window where you got into the building at?
Stacy told police she and her sister had been out past curfew. They entered the house through a window so they wouldn't wake up their father. She said her only reason for returning to the house was to pick up a puppy they had recently adopted.
Well, what happened when you came back last night?
I came through the window. I came in, I got my dog. And then the gun was... Where was it? Leaning up against this chair right here. And I decided at that moment that I was going to do it. I was going to kill him.
Was the gun already loaded?
Yes.
What did you do next after you decided that you were going to do it last night?
Went upstairs.
You went upstairs? Okay, show me the route you took.
Put the gun on that little ledge and then pulled the trigger.
Okay. The first time you shot him, where did you hit him?
Right here in the shoulder.
In the left shoulder?
Yes.
Okay, what did he do?
He woke up. He thought that he had broke his collarbone. And he started calling my name.
Stacy said she wanted to call 911 but wasn't able to find the phone.
I couldn't find it. And then I panicked. So then I shot him again.
After making the video, Detective Schulte said he believed Stacy was telling the truth and felt sorry for her. So he made her a promise.
I just told her I'll always be there, you know, when it came for trial, and that she could count on me testifying.
Detective Schulte was unaware of what Stacy's sister and friend Jason were telling police. If what they said was true, it would appear Stacy had a more sinister motive for killing her father.
I really believe it was more for financial gain than out of the pure hatred of the man.
On the 4th of July, 1990, 18-year-old Stacy Lannert was sitting in a St. Louis jail cell. Hours earlier, she had confessed to police that she shot and killed her father, Tom Lannert, the day before.
I closed my eyes and I pulled the trigger.
She claimed that years of sexual abuse had driven her to murder.
I was very, very just broken and defeated.
One of the investigating officers, a specialist in abuse cases, found Stacy's story convincing.
I believe that she was raped by her father prior to the homicide. It was more of a revenge murder for the years of abuse.
But in the days after the murder, the chief of police would reach a far different conclusion.
It's my belief that that was a ploy, if not a bold-faced lie, in which to try to justify why the act was committed.
The motive, the chief would conclude, was money. From the outset, Chief Milam could find no one to back up Stacy's claim of abuse.
I believe she did say something to Detective Schulte about being abused, but that was never confirmed.
The only one to mention any abuse was Stacy's sister, Christy, who said the first time she ever heard of it was after her father's murder. In a written police statement, Christy said, quote, "Dad and I had a basically normal relationship. He never made any sexual advances towards me or to Stacy, to my knowledge. After it happened, though, Stacy told me he had raped her." Christy also said after the murder, she was coached by Stacy and her friend, Jason Fortune, telling police, quote, "They told me to say that we went back to our house to get the puppy, and not to say anything about all the money she spent." Money. Several of Stacy's friends brought up the subject with police. Stacy, it seems, had been telling her friends that her father recently inherited a large amount of money, $500,000, money she stood to gain if he died.
I'd found a slip for certificate of deposit that was cashed once that was $100,000. And I said, wow, I didn't realize we had that much money. So they tried to say that I wanted that money.
She had her car picked out. She had Christy's car picked out. She even had my car picked out. She wanted to open a nightclub. She wanted to have all kinds of real neat paintings and stuff,
Stacy's friend Jason Fortune, faced with the possibility of being charged as an accessory, told police Stacy had been forging her father's signature on checks and had recently bought herself a $600 car stereo with her father's credit card.
Stacy and her dad did not get along at all, but I really believe it was more for financial gain than for out of the pure hatred of the man.
So Stacy mentioned to you several times during this period before he was killed that she would have tremendous financial gain?
Yes.
The teenager claimed to have witnessed Stacy getting cash together to pay off a hitman to kill her father.
Okay, and why did she say she was cashing the check? The specific reason?
To give to Ronnie so that he would be paid off to kill her father.
Ronnie was Ron Barnett, a former babysitter of Stacy Lannert. The next day, he was brought to the station for questioning and quickly confirmed the story about hiring a hitman.
It all started about 4 weeks ago with her just telling me that she wanted to kill her father. And eventually it led to her asking me if I knew anybody that would kill him.
Melanie Brown, one of Christy Lannert's friends, told police that she heard about the murder plot from Christy just days before it happened.
She just said that, she's like, yeah, me and Stacy are gonna have our dad killed or something like that. Ever since then, Stacy's been spending money like acres on trees.
Police learned that despite all the talk of hiring a hitman, just a week before the murder, Stacy and her sister had practiced firing their father's gun in an open field.
Who fired the weapon?
Stacy and Christy.
Both of them fired?
Yes.
Then police learned from Stacy's friends that just days before he was murdered, Tom Lannert found out about Stacy's spending spree.
My dad got mad a few days ago because he found out that Stacy had wrote checks and signed his name.
Stacy's actions after the killing did not add to her credibility. Her friend Ron told investigators about how Stacy showed up at his house early the next morning after the murder.
She told me that she had killed her father, and I didn't know what to think. She had a gun in the car, and asked me if I would get rid of it.
Today, Christy Lannert admits that she was willing to tell police whatever she needed to help her sister, whom she insists is the victim.
I told him so many different things. I don't remember. I don't know. I just didn't want to tell him the truth. You know, she didn't want anybody to know the real reason, which kind of makes sense if you think about it. But at the time she shot him, it wasn't for monetary gain.
But after wading through all the statements and inconsistencies, the chief of police who oversaw the investigation could only reach one conclusion: that just before the murder, Stacy Lannert was acting more like a mastermind than a victim.
I firmly believe, from reading the various statements that she had made prior to the homicide, that it was for material gain, monetary gain only.
In late July, Stacy Lannert was charged with first-degree murder. The question now was whether Lannert's lawyer could build a defense around her allegations of abuse.
I was into it. I was gonna kill him.
In St. Louis on July 30th, 1990, 18-year-old Stacy Lannert was indicted for the murder of her father, 43-year-old financial consultant Tom Lannert. In confessing the murder, Stacy said she was driven to kill after being sexually abused by her father for years. But prosecutor Bob McCullough says this was no case of self-defense.
Once we got into it, it was pretty clear that it was, without question, a murder first-degree case. It's the difference between a cold-blooded murder and a hot-blooded murder, and this is a cold-blooded murder.
Lannert's motive, McCullough says, was pure and simple: to get her hands on a $500,000 inheritance. Stacy's younger sister, Christy, was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. If convicted, the sisters faced maximum sentences of life in prison. Their friend Jason Fortune was not charged and agreed to testify for the prosecution. Lannert's defense attorney, Chris McGraw, knew it would be an uphill battle to win in court.
What we had was a victim who was asleep at the time of the first shot, and then a second kill shot.
To prove his client's claim that she was motivated by years of abuse, McGraw would have to dig into Lannert's psychological background and family history. In the summer of 1969, Stacy's mother, Deborah Underwood, met 23-year-old Tom Lannert.
He was very charming, and he was sophisticated, and just he was very gentlemanly-like and always treated me well. I thought he was my knight in shining armor at the time.
They were married in the fall of 1970, and Deb was eager to start a family.
Actually, he wanted me to go on to college, and I told him I wanted to have a baby. So I got pregnant and had Stacy.
Stacy was born in May 1972. Her sister Christy came along 2 years later. Deb stayed home with the children while Tom Lannert went to work as an insurance actuary. Deb says at first her husband was a good provider and a good father, as Stacy also recalls.
I had a great childhood. My mom was real focused on her kids, me and my sister, and we were very loved, felt extremely loved. Everything was perfect, as perfect as it can be.
But as the girls grew older, Tom's work became unsteady. By the time Stacy was in grade school, she says, things at home were starting to change.
My dad wound up transferring around a lot, going to different jobs. And eventually he started drinking.
Tom's drinking grew worse after his own father passed away in 1980. Stacy says that's when the abuse began. She was 8 years old.
At first I didn't really realize that it was wrong. It was just a game. It was our game. And he had me sit on his lap, and eventually he had me touch him.
Stacy said he only played the game when he'd been drinking.
He told me that I was his favorite daughter, and that it was our secret, and that it's a game that only him and I would play.
But about a year later, according to Stacy, the game turned violent.
I was 9, the first time that my dad ever raped me. And when he raped me, he hurt me. It hurt so badly, like I was just being torn into pieces.
The next day, Stacy says, she suddenly viewed this man as a two-faced monster, not the loving father she'd always known.
In no way did he resemble that same person that had hurt me the night before. He was just different, smiling, happy to see me. He acted like nothing had happened.
Over the next 9 years, Stacy says her dad would sometimes rape her as often as 2 to 3 times a week. She says this would occur while her mother was in the house.
She'd be upstairs, and I really thought she knew, because in the beginning I would scream to get away from him.
I heard Stacy squeal down in the basement.
And she would come to the top of the stairs and yell down and ask if everything was okay.
And I'd say, "What's going on?" And he'd say, "Nothing, we were just playing." And Stacy would say, "Yeah, that's what we were doing." And so I go back upstairs.
She'd turn around and walk away, and he'd rape me. So I did think she knew.
But Underwood says although she felt uneasy about what she heard coming from the basement, she let it go. Stacy appeared to grow into a typical teenager.
She played volleyball. She was a cheerleader. She had friends.
I was involved in as many school activities as I could be. I loved going to school because there I could pretend like everything was okay.
Stacy's mother, Deb Underwood, says in time, her relationship with her husband grew tense because of his drinking. By 1985, the couple divorced, agreeing to joint custody of their daughters, 13-year-old Stacy and 11-year-old Christy. After the divorce, Stacy's anger and resentment toward her mother emerged.
I wouldn't talk to her anymore. She'd tell me to do something, and I'd be very insolent towards her.
Deb Underwood thought her daughter was angry over the divorce. She believed therapy might help and arranged counseling for Stacy. Stacy's demeanor in therapy led the counselor to suspect she may have been abused.
She felt that Stacy had some symptoms of a person who had been molested, or I don't even think she said raped at the time. I think she had said molested.
Deb Underwood chose not to talk to Stacy about it, thinking her daughter wouldn't open up to her. Instead, Underwood confided in her mother, Stacy's grandmother, and asked if she would talk to Stacy.
She did, and she asked Stacy, "Has your father ever touched you in places he shouldn't?" And Stacy said, "Well, no, Grandma, my daddy wouldn't do anything like that." So I took it from that she hadn't been molested, that Tom hadn't touched her inappropriately.
I had separated my father into 2 separate people. One was the man who raped me, and the other was my daddy. So if anybody was to ask me if my dad had hurt me, I could answer in all honesty, no, because he wasn't. In my mind, he wasn't.
In 1988, Stacy and Christy chose to live with their father in St. Louis when their mother remarried. Deb Underwood moved to Guam with her new husband, who was serving in the Air Force. About a year later, when Stacy was 17, she put her differences with her mom aside and went for an extended visit to Guam. Back in St. Louis, her younger sister Christy began having trouble with her father.
It got pretty horrible. I'd be out drinking, and then when he came home, I'd get beat up a lot.
After a few months, Christy asked her sister to come home. Afraid for her sister's safety, Stacy returned, and the sisters grew closer. Against their father's wishes, they got a dog.
We kind of hid it from him at first, and then he found out, and he didn't like it. Threatened to kill it.
Stacy claims that shortly after her return, the sexual abuse resumed.
Dad was becoming increasingly violent, not just towards me, but also towards my sister. And he would threaten. He would threaten both of us. He was very controlling, and I had to depend on him for cash.
A month after returning home, Stacy began telling her friends she hated her father and wanted him dead. At first, Christy didn't take the threats seriously.
I don't think it was something she'd actually do. It was just like a fantasy type deal, because I thought about it too sometimes.
It was really nice to fantasize about, to be able to close your eyes And imagine this man who terrorizes you and rapes you and beats your sister not being there anymore.
Then came July 3rd, 1990. As the Independence Day celebrations got underway in St. Louis, tensions were rising at the Lannert house.
We were arguing over the dog. He wanted me to get rid of it, and I said, I'm not getting rid of this dog.
After the argument, Stacy and Christy went out for dinner with friends and paid for it with Tom Lannert's credit card. They went to the city's annual Independence Day celebration, which was always held near the Gateway Arch.
They had fireworks. I don't really remember seeing them, but I'm sure we did, but I don't really remember. We came back and dropped our friends off.
By this time, it was past curfew, and the girls say they didn't want to go back home and face their father's wrath. They planned on using his credit card to spend the night at a motel, but first they wanted to pick up their dog.
We didn't want to go through the front door because he was sleeping on the couch. So we went in through the basement window. I guess he woke up upstairs. I heard something upstairs and the gun was downstairs. So I took it up there. I just wanted it all to end and be over. And I set the gun on top of a ledge and I closed my eyes and I pulled the trigger. He was screaming my name. He didn't realize that he was shot. I was terrified, just absolutely terrified.
I just remember Stacy telling me to call 911, and I remember frantically searching for our phone, and I couldn't find one.
The girls said they later realized their father had ripped the phone lines out of the wall.
He started calling us all kinds of names, calling us sluts and whores, and just wait till I get up from here, and it was just too much. And I knew that if he ever got up from that couch, he would kill us. He would kill us. I put that gun back on there and shot him a second time.
Stacy then picked up the shell casing, put the gun in the car, and drove to a motel. The next morning, Stacy got rid of the gun with the help of her friend, Ron Barnett.
I think she just, snapped and shot him. I think to protect the both of us. She hadn't had enough. She was tired of his crap, basically.
The more defense attorney Chris McGraw learned, the more convinced he grew that Stacy Lannert had been the victim of an abusive father. But would a jury believe his client's story? And even if it did, would it agree that such a horrific family history could somehow justify murder? In July 1990, St. Louis sisters Christy and Stacy Lannert were in custody for the murder of their father, Tom Lannert. Stacy faced a first-degree murder charge. Her younger sister Christy was accused of conspiracy to kill. Even though Christy was only 16 years old, the judge ruled she could stand trial as an adult, a frightening prospect for the teenager.
I was naturally scared, so I talked to Stacy, and Stacy, I guess, was scared for me too. And so we decided together, this would probably be the best thing for me to take the plea bargain.
On April 19th, 1991, Christy Lannert accepted a deal offered by prosecutors, pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in exchange for a 5-year sentence. Stacy Lannert faced a very different situation. An attempt at plea negotiations quickly broke down. The government stayed firm in its belief that Stacy murdered for money.
The government kind of took a hard stand that they found that the motive was for pecuniary gain, and so we couldn't really reach a settlement.
I guess part of me was arrogant, and part of me was angry because I knew what I had went through, and here these people were saying that I was lying, and I wasn't lying. I was telling the truth.
But due to Missouri law, Stacy could not plead self-defense.
What we had was victim who was asleep at the time of the first shot, and then a second kill shot. Missouri doesn't recognize that as a self-defense.
In order to claim self-defense, the actor has to be in imminent danger of death or serious physical injury. Imminent means right now, right here, right now.
So Stacy's attorney decided to go with an insanity defense.
Once the jury heard what her mental state was, they could find her guilty not of murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, meaning that she didn't premeditate. We felt that was the only way to get the past history of abuse was a mental health defense, what they call NGRI, not guilty by reasons of insanity.
On October 26, 1992, the murder trial of Stacy Lannert got underway in St. Louis County. In its opening statement, the prosecution argued that Stacy had carefully planned and carried out the murder of her father. They told jurors she had practiced shooting with her father's gun, with shells she had purchased. Prosecutors said Stacy Lannert fully intended to murder her father that night in July 1990.
She pretty much had it set up so that she could sneak back into the house through the basement window, sneak upstairs, knowing her father would, in all likelihood, be asleep or passed out, and then killed him.
The prosecution started its case by playing the videotape walkthrough, in which the defendant confessed to murdering her father.
But her demeanor doesn't change from start to finish. She's very matter-of-fact about it. She'll chewing her gum, kind of bored to be there. I mean, she could be just as easily describing what she had for dinner, and she's very laid back about the whole process.
Stacy came across in the courtroom as a very quiet, demure young woman. In that video, she looked so totally different. She looked like a very typical teenager. So it was a big contrast for what we saw in the courtroom.
On the second day of the trial, Stacy's friend Jason Fortune took the stand. As he did in his taped confession, he told the court of Stacy's attempt to hire a hitman and pay for it with her father's money.
In all the time that she's trying to hire somebody to kill her father, she certainly never mentions that she is because he's been sexually abusing her. It's always because of the money.
The prosecution argued that Stacy acted out of greed, that she killed her father to get her hands on a family inheritance.
He inherited about $500,000. She was making plans for spending all of that money once her father was dead.
The prosecution offered proof of her spending sprees just before her father's death.
From about the middle of June until the time she killed him, she spent about $5,000 of his dollars. She did it by forging his name on checks that were made out to her.
After 2 days of testimony, the state rested its case. On the third day of trial, the defense opened by calling Stacy Lannert. On the witness stand, Stacy offered very few details of the sexual abuse.
I know that sounds really strange, but I figured everybody knew. I was so embarrassed and ashamed, and I know I was on trial for my life. I still couldn't say that he even raped me. I was just very ashamed.
She looked scared to death, and also like she was very nervous and hesitant about talking about any of the abuse that happened in her life.
Another juror viewed Stacy quite differently.
She did not present herself very well on the witness stand at all. No remorse. She appeared to look as if she was not telling the truth.
Stacy Lannert's sister, Christy, was not called to testify on her sister's behalf.
We interviewed her, and she would not admit to being sexually abused at the time. So we didn't think that Christy could really offer anything to us. In fact, may hurt us in the fact that she'd already pled guilty to the offense.
The defense called an expert in child sex abuse to testify to Stacy's state of mind at the time of the murder. The psychiatrist told the court that due to the sexual abuse Stacy had endured, she suffered from a dissociative disorder, a condition that caused her to disconnect with reality.
Meaning that at the time of the first and second shot, she was not it was not her intent. She was not premeditating. She did not coolly deliberate on killing her father.
The insanity defense I was not buying because Stacy shot him once, then went back and shot him again. She seemed to be a troubled teen, but insanity, no.
The prosecution argued the abuse never even occurred.
That's not to say that he was going to win Father of the Year award. He certainly wasn't. But there's absolutely no evidence, and in fact, evidence to the contrary, of him sexually or physically abusing either her or her sister Christy.
After 5 days of testimony, the fate of Stacy Lannert was put in the hands of the jury. Their verdict is next. St. Louis, Missouri. On October 30th, 1992, jurors began deliberating the fate of 20-year-old Stacy Lannert. Lannert had confessed to shooting and killing her father after what she claimed was years of sexual abuse. The charge? First-degree murder, carried a sentence of life behind bars. Her lawyer had presented an insanity defense, hoping to convince jurors to consider a lesser charge.
They had the option of either finding Stacy not guilty by reasons of mental illness, or they could also find that she did not deliberate and that she was guilty of the murder in the second degree.
I mean, she admitted she killed him. It was whether it was first-degree or second-degree murder.
The prosecution had argued the killing was carefully premeditated. The jury deliberated for only 5.5 hours before reaching a verdict. On October 30th, 1992, Stacy Lannert was found guilty of the first-degree murder of her father.
She did take the gun. She bought shells for it. She took it out and practiced shooting. So people really felt that probably she did intend to kill him when she came back in the house that night.
I feel like it was premeditated murder because she had tried to hire a hitman. I have sympathy for her if she was sexually molested. But that doesn't give her the right to just murder someone.
Stacy says she was not surprised by the verdict.
I knew that I had committed the crime, so it still hurt to hear it. It still hurt to hear it, that those 12 people would find you that way.
Following the verdict, the judge handed down the mandatory sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole.
In this type of case, where someone was victimized, as Stacy was, you really hope to have a better outcome than that.
It's a severe sentence for anyone, and certainly for a 20-year-old. I'm not saying she doesn't deserve it. It's a severe sentence, and she deserves every bit of it.
Stacy Lannert was sent to a maximum security prison in Vandalia, Missouri. In the years since her conviction, she has exhausted all her appeals. Her one last chance at freedom is an appeal to the governor of Missouri. She hopes he'll grant her clemency. Stacy Lannert's attorney for more than a decade, Ellen Floatman, has urged her client to speak out whenever she can and share her story with the public.
We've made her talk to all sorts of media because we think it will help her, and it's hard on her, but it's made her stronger. It's made her able to deal with it.
Floatman says in the last few years, Stacy has come to recall even more memories of the events leading up to the murder. The more she talks about it, the easier it is for her to deal with it.
Every time I hear her tell her story, I hear something new because she's more comfortable every time she tells it.
But Lannert doesn't just remember new details from the years she says her father abused her. She now says she also recalls the terrifying event that pushed her past the breaking point. The day of the murder, she claims her father sexually assaulted her sister for the first time.
He said, "There's your replacement," and he grabbed my sister and he took her in to his room. And I don't know if he raped her. I believed he did. I believed he did. In my mind, he was.
She's never said any of this before. Some you can pass off to, well, it's, you know, there's more detail coming out now, but some of the things that she didn't say, you can't pass off to that. Is there anybody who can seriously believe or contend that she wouldn't have mentioned that the night I killed my father, by the way, he viciously raped my sister? Well, of course, I mean, that's made up. Christy, her sister, denies that there was ever any sort of sexual abuse, until now.
Christy now confirms her sister's new allegation, saying she was attacked the day her father was murdered.
Well, earlier that day, we all got into a fight, and my dad dragged me into his room and raped me while Stacy was outside. And I had never talked to her about it before.
Stacy says there's a reason why she didn't speak up back then.
I didn't want anybody to know, and it wasn't my place to tell them what had happened to her. And I was so ashamed that I had let that happen to her, and I didn't want to expose her pain like that to anybody.
It is not credible that while she is on trial for her life, that none of these would just jump back into her memory. It's just not credible that, you know, that just came back to her recently. Recently being 10 years later.
The victims, it takes so long for them to tell. Many of them are abused for years, as Stacy was, before they can start to tell people.
It's a just sentence, and she's right where she belongs, and I think that ultimately that's right where she will stay.
Stacy's fate is now in the hands of Missouri's governor.
The great thing about our legal system is we can sometimes correct our injustices, and I'd like to think that we can do that in Stacy's case. I'd like to think that the governor could see fit to commute her sentence to something that's parolable.
I do believe that when people see Stacy, when they see her talk about this, when they hear her, they believe in her and they understand why we're doing this. And I think the governor's going to feel that way too. I really do.
We'll be looking at all of them, be making a recommendation.
Anytime soon? Or?
Don't have a timeline yet.
Unless she is granted clemency, Lannert will likely remain in prison for the rest of her life.
Justice is supposed to be fair, and I wasn't given justice in this case. And eventually, at some point in time, somebody has got to stop and help me. And unfortunately, right now, the governor's the only person who can.
Stacy Lannert's sister, Christy, wound up serving 2 years in prison for her role in their father's murder. After her release in 1992, Christy inherited $150,000 from her father's estate. But there was a catch. A judge ordered the entire amount donated to charity.